Making folds in clothing for 3D printing or still renders is one thing, because you don't have to worry about polygon limits or topology so much. As long as it looks good, it is good. But when making believable folds in clothing for low poly characters like in games and cartoony animation, there are some limits that you run into. In this video, I'll show you some ways of making great clothing and wrinkles in ZBrush without having to add more than a few extra polygons. Making folds in clothing for 3D printing or still renders is one thing because you don't have to worry about polygon limits or topology so much. As long as it looks good, it is good. But when making believable folds in clothing for low poly characters like in games and cartoony animation, there are some limits that you run into. In this video, I'll show you some ways of making great clothing wrinkles in ZBrush without having to add more than a few extra polygons. Okay, so here's our character, and his pants need to have some folds and wrinkles. Go ahead and zoom in on that. I'm going to hit F to frame on the active subtool. Now, normally what you might want to do in ZBrush is start subdividing this 1,000 times and go ahead and sculpt all those wrinkles in, but we want to keep it low poly. So let's try a different approach. Instead, what I'm going to do is pick a few polygons around this to extrude inwards and then sculpt that out for the folds. I'm going to hit Shift F to turn on my wireframe. I like to use wireframe when using the Z modeler brush. And I'm just going to hit B and Z to bring up the different brushes. And let's click on Z modeler or hit M on the keyboard. So the Z modeler brush is kind of like a low poly editing brush. And the way we want to use it is to zoom in here on any particular section we want to work on. And you can see it's doing something a little bit different with the edges and faces and vertices. And right now I want to operate on faces. So I'm going to hover over a face and hold down spacebar. This brings up a lot of different functions we can use with this brush. A lot of the basic polygon editing tools you might find in something like Maya or 3ds Max. For this, what we want to do is use the Extrude function. And by default, tools are on single poly, but what I want to do is affect entire polygroups. Now, we don't have any polygroups yet, so a quick way to do that with the Z modeler brush is just to hold down the Alt key and just start clicking on different polygons. So we can define where we want different folds and wrinkles to be. I've got symmetry turned off so I can create kind of more organic folds. And I just want to identify where different folds could be. So some are going to be longer, some are going to be shorter. I just want to make sure they're just kind of like randomly organized around. Now, one thing you want to watch out for is to not create any of these polygroups along a border edge. That's going to create some bad non-manifold geometry, for using a technical term. So we want to make sure we don't do that. I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that. But just generally all around, what you want to do is start identifying places where some of these folds could be. I'm just going to go ahead and put these in, just being kind of random about it. And I also want to keep them separate. I don't want to have two different folds overlapping like that. It'll kind of create a weird effect that I don't really want. So let's keep a gap between all of these different fold sections. And the Z modeler brush, you have to be a little bit careful about it sometimes. I accidentally just deleted an entire edge loop because I clicked on an edge instead of a polygon. So I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that. I'll try that again, being a little bit more precise, a little bit more careful here. Okay, let's get a couple of folds going in the back of the knee, where clothing tends to bunch up in a place like this. And also I want to get a few of these folds going in the crotch. And just trying to stagger it. Oops, I did it again. I accidentally clicked on an edge there. And one more for good measure. Okay, let's go ahead and zoom out and see what we've got here. Okay, we've got some nice places for folds isolated. Now what we can do is extrude these inwards. So what I'm going to do is hover over one of these polygons, hold down spacebar, make sure we've got extrude set, and polygroup all. So this is going to apply the extrude effect to everything that has the same polygon that I'm going to click on. So just go ahead and click and drag on one of these groups. If I drag to the right, it's going to extrude outwards, which is not what I want. I'm going to go to the left and extrude inwards. About like that looks good. Okay, so it looks a little bit mechanical, a little bit hard-edged right now. So let's deal with that. What I want to do is turn on dynamic subdivision. And what this is, it's sort of a preview subdivision, or a subdivision that's not actually subdividing the model, but it just looks like it is. It's just smoothing it out. It's the same kind of effect you might have when you go to render a character in an animation software, and it will just smooth everything out, make it look nice and smooth so you don't see the polygons. So let's go into geometry and open up dynamic subdiv and just turn that on. All right, let's go ahead and turn off polyframe. So it's looking a little bit better. It's still a little awkward. Okay, let's make these look a little bit nicer. What I'm going to do is get my sculpt brush, my inflate brush. I'm going to hit B, I, and you can hit N, or just click inflate here. Set a draw size. All right, let's just go in and hold down Shift and just start smoothing some of this out so it's not quite so hard-edged, not quite so rectangular, so it looks a little bit more natural. Just going to go around and just do this to all of these a little bit. Don't worry if the boot is poking through, we can always fix that later. Just want to get rid of a little bit of that harsh rectangular feel to those wrinkles. Okay, almost done here. Okay, looking good. Now with the inflate brush, what I can do is just come in here and sculpt some of this space around the wrinkles, trying to make it look a little bit more organic as well. I'm going to bring up the intensity. That effect was a little bit weak. Let's see if we can make a little bit of a stronger effect here. Okay, looking good. So you just want to kind of build up some of these folds, kind of overlapping a little bit, or get a little bit of a sagging sense. Hold down Alt and push in if you want that fold to go in deeper, or use it without Alt to inflate outwards. You just want to go all the way around, trying to make it look a little bit more organic. And you might want to smooth a little bit more, whatever it needs to make it look better. I'll just look at this from a different angle here. Maybe sculpt some of this out a bit more, just paying attention to everything all the way around. If it starts to look a little too much, you can always smooth it out. Just want to get a little bit of a crisscross effect right here. It's kind of a common pattern you see in clothing wrinkles. There's kind of an X pattern that forms around wrinkles. Might want to turn on solo mode here so I just see the pants, so that boot doesn't distract me from what I'm trying to do here. And it's just a matter of continuing to go around, seeing if there's anything that looks awkward, and just building it out and making it look better. Okay, let's take a look at this. All right, looks like just a little bit more I want to do here. Okay, there's definitely more that I could keep doing, but in the sake of time, I'm going to stop here. I'm sure you can get a sense for where this could go if you spent more time on it. And we'll just look around and see if there's any awkward places where the boot is popping through. I'm going to switch to my move brush, BMV. Get a little bit of a bigger brush here. And I just want to pull this pant leg out so it's not intersecting with those boots. Might want to hold down Alt so that the move brush pushes and pulls relative to the direction that the cloth is facing. Okay. Great, so now we have some nice folds without having to sculpt in higher subdivision levels or adding a lot more geometry. Now, as long as you render this with smoothing turned on, it should look great.